Hey y'all, welcome to the show. I am excited that I have two of my closest friends, Maggie Luna and Tunchi. You guys might know her from the podcast on the Rec-Yard Women's Prison podcast, right? Plug the podcast here. That was the spot.
Yeah.
So we are in Colorado at an incredible international conference, and we're ready because we're about to go back out, but we wanted to share with you guys a little bit. It is the 48th annual Natural Hazards Workshop. And how do a bunch of ex-cons fit into natural hazard planning? Tunchi.
Well, because how do you make plans in the prison to deal with emergencies without lived experience?
So speaking of lived experience, Miss Luna, Maggie, you were locked up when Hurricane Harvey hit, and you were close to the coast. Frankly, you were in Dayton, Texas. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
Sure. When I was incarcerated in Dayton, we experienced Hurricane Harvey. It was very terrifying. There was no real plan for the humans. Once we started losing power and air, it was toxic, it was terrifying, and we were all just left there to fend for ourselves and hope that we didn't die.
Before the storm hit, did you guys know it was coming? Like, were you seeing the news? And
we started seeing the news reports that it was coming, and then they shut off the TVs and shut off our phones, so we couldn't have communication with the outside. So we didn't know what was actually happening. And then when the phones came back on and the TVs came back on, there was nothing but devastation out there. And so I was terrified that my family was floating down a river somewhere.
Was there water in the dorm or on the unit?
We couldn't even leave our unit for a week because the water was so high. And they had girls they pulled girls in full hazmat suits and put them in water boots so they could walk to the kitchen to make sandwiches for us.
Wow.
And we didn't eat for 72 hours because the first 72 hours they had no idea what to do, so they just left us there.
Well, that's what happens in any kind of an emergency situation when there's not a plan ahead of time. And can you tell us about TDCJ's policy regarding, I don't know, farm equipment, livestock, Tunch?
Yeah, they have pretty solid plans to keep the equipment and the livestock that they sell. Of course, they feed us the scraps. They've got plans for those things so that they're not damaged or washed away. But when it comes to the human value, it seems like it's scattered and haphazard. And they'll say that they have those plans, but we can't really look at them because they don't trust us, right? And we saw that with some of our legislation that we tried to pass, that the key part of, a planning board or committee would have voices of lived experience who've been in the system that know what the day-to-day looks like. And got through the third reading in the House. And then the bill author bowed down to political persuasion and pulled that piece of the bill out.
The interesting thing is that three of us and anyone who has been in just darn near any institution, frankly, including even educational institutions, no one knows more about how policies don't follow through than the actual people that are there all the time. And especially in the prison system, we're talking about people that are there 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, right? So we definitely know, okay, there's a policy in place for this, but it's not happening because of this. And that's why our voices are so important in that planning stage, which I'm so excited. Texas A&M, gosh, I should know the name of their department. It's the hazard
center.
Hazard center. It is the hazard center. So we're so excited that they have that understanding that our voices are needed. So that's why we were invited to this conference, and we actually got to take part of a panel discussion yesterday talking about different things. You talked about being locked up with the swine flu, having experienced seeing people get sick from that.
Yeah, and I always tell the part of the story is that as we watched people succumb to swine flu, which they weren't properly testing, we saw that through COVID, because if you test positive for an infectious disease, you are to be immediately quarantined and add seg. Well, I don't want to leave my community, the girls that keep me safe, that check on me when I'm ill. So we used to ride out on our bunks when we got sick. And, this was happening during the swine flu. And I told my neighbor, I was like, girl, could you imagine if something worse came through here? They would let us die. And unfortunately, something worse came through, and you were there during COVID.
I was there during COVID, and I just want to say that if they had used the example of swine flu and learned from their mistakes and kept records of what to do and what worked and what didn't work, they might have been prepared to save life when COVID hit. And they were scrambling. There was no plan. They didn't know what to do. Each unit was doing different things. There was no mass sanitizing procedure in place. They were not checking temperatures until way at the end, after lots and lots of cases. And on my unit, they weren't even quarantining for months. And then they start to empty a dorm. And so all of these things, life could have been prevented, definitely. And then being incarcerated, knowing that there are policies and plans, actual guidelines to follow in the event of, I don't know, a hurricane to save the cattle, and not having one in place to save you. Maggie, can you talk about what that does to you mentally and emotionally?
Oh yeah, it was really like feeling that they have a plan for this farm equipment and these pigs and these animals, but they're just going to let us sit here and die. And our families don't know what's happening, but they make sure that these pigs are taken care of. So who are we? We're nobody to them.
Livestock gets evacuated and human life just sits there. So I was at the end of my incarceration during hurricane season. I was in Dayton, Texas, also on a different unit. I was on the Henley unit, and there was a storm coming through, and I don't even remember the name, guys, but they were on the news. They were recommending people to evacuate. And so we're like, what's going on? Well, that morning, the major comes in and she says, you guys, she hands out chain bags. It's like a red potato sack is what it looks like. She says, you guys can take one chain bag, get the most important things, pack light. I don't know where we're going. You're being evacuated. And phones are off. And so we're packed and we're sitting with our chain bags. We're nervous. We don't know what's going on. We're going to the windows, looking at the weather, and she comes back. We don't hear anything for hours and hours and hours. And towards the end of the workday, the end of their shift, she comes back and says, ladies, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry they're not evacuating you. I'm staying on the unit. But if this is the time to pray. That's what she said. This is the time to pray. And I'm sorry they're not evacuating you. But they didn't have a place for us to go because they didn't have a plan in place. So that's what we're doing. And we're technically working. This is like a little tiny break. We wanted to visit with you guys. Thanks for hanging out. And we will see y'all next time. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Jennifer. Bye, y'all.